1954年3月1日、アメリカがマーシャル諸島で行った広島原爆の1000倍という威力を持つ水爆実験に対して、実験に抗議し、人類の生存のために立ち上がった無数の人々の声と行動の中で、生まれました。今年創立60年を迎えます。創立のきっかけとなった1955年の第1回原水爆禁止世界大会の宣言は、原水爆被害者の不幸な実相は広く世界に知られなければなりません。救済運動を通じて、救済運動こそが原水爆禁止運動の基礎であると述べています。今日、広島、長崎の被爆者の皆さん、核実験と核開発による被害者の皆さんは、核抑止力論に対する最も強い抵抗者であり、かけがえのない存在です。この分科会で被爆者の証言を聞き、実相を学び、核兵器をめぐる議論の中心となっている人道性について学んでいただきたいと思います。広島、長崎の被爆者の皆さん、マーシャル諸島をはじめ、
Hello everyone, my name is Yasui Masakazu. I'm the Secretary General of Japan Gensuikyo. On behalf of the organizers of this workshop, I'd like to say a few words. So Japan Gensuikyo was born after the nationwide and worldwide protest against the Bikini hydrogen bomb test of March the 1st, 1954. So out of this mounting resistance and a petition campaign against ANH bombs, our organization was founded in 1955. So we are having the 60th anniversary of the founding of Gensuikyo this year. And Gensuikyo was born after the very first World Conference against atomic and hydrogen bombs held in 1955. The resolution of the first World Conference against atomic and hydrogen bombs said the unfortunate victimization of the nuclear weapons and the reality of the atomic bombing should be made known all over the world. And our movement to save the victims should be the basis of our movement. So carrying on our tradition of our Gensuikyo's movement, today we are pleased to have and welcome the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombing and the victims of nuclear weapons development. And their voices are the most powerful testimonies and the resistance of nuclear weapons. And they are a very important presence in our worldwide movement against nuclear weapons. And they will give strong testimonies of the very inhumanity of nuclear weapons.
それでは広島、長崎の被爆者の皆さん、マーシャル諸島をはじめ核実験、核被害者の皆さん、どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。
So let us learn from their testimonies and take their testimonies to our movement. So thank you very much, the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and nuclear development. And we'd like to learn from you. Thank you.
Before I call each victim speaker, I want to ask you to keep your time, and I already asked them to speak, asked you to speak within almost 7 minutes. So first of all, I'd like to invite Mr. Toshiki Figumori. He's a Hiroshima survivor.
Konnichiwa. 私は 1歳の時に広島の爆心地から 2.3 キロ地点で被爆した被爆者の一人です。当時、我が家は祖父、父母、9人兄弟姉妹の12人の大家族でした。8月6日、私は体調を崩して母に背負われ病院に行く途中でした。川の土手の上を歩いていた母が鈍い爆音を聞き、空襲かと身構えた瞬間、閃光が走り、猛烈な爆風が襲ってきて母子とも土手の下に吹き飛ばされました。偶然にも爆心と親子の間に2階建ての民家があり、熱線を直接受けることは免れました。
My name is Toshiki Figumori. I am a Hiroshima survivor. 70 years ago, I was a 1-year-old baby. I was 2.3 kilometers from the blast center of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Back then, my family consisted of 12 members: my grandfather, father, mother, 8 brothers and sisters, and myself. As I was sick on that day, my mother was carrying me on her back to the hospital. She was walking along the river bank. As soon as she heard a low-pitched noise that sounded like a detonation and tried to take shelter, a brilliant flash appeared and both of us were blown down to the dry riverbed by a fierce blast. Fortunately, there was a 2-story house between the explosion and us, which I think prevented us from being exposed to the direct heat rays.
私を抱いて土手の上に上がり、母が見たのは市の中心部の上を煙と雲が覆い、一面火の手が上がっている予想もしない光景でした。煙と火炎の真ん中には三女ミサオと四女トシコが通う私立第一高等女学校がありました。トシコは1年生、学徒動員で爆心地近くの建物疎開に当たっているはずでした。
When my mother crawled up on the riverbank with me in her arms, she saw an incredible sea of fire, with smoke and a low cloud hovering above the city center. In the midst of the fire was a girls' school that 2 of my sisters attended. My 4th sister, who was a first grader at the school, was mobilized with her classmates to engage in a building demolition near the Ground Zero area. Fleeing from fire, my mother carried me and escaped to the Ushitayama hillside. My grandfather and 3rd sister, who were at home, as well as my father and eldest and 2nd sisters, who had been at work, joined us there. But my 4th sister did not come. My 2 brothers, who were elementary school students, and 2 other preschool-age sisters were away from Hiroshima at that time, so they did not suffer the atomic bombing. The next morning, my father and eldest sister went down the hill to look for our missing sister. What they saw was a hell on earth. The city was full of rubble, blood-stained victims and dead bodies. Along the river, they saw countless bodies of girl students. They must have tried to flee from the raging fire and jumped into the river. A timber basin was filled with corpses floating on the surface. They looked for her the next day and also the following day, but she was never found. I received a head injury by the bomb, which later festered. My entire head was bandaged, leaving only my eyes, nose, and mouth visible. My family believed that I would die soon, just like the other people who were dying one after another around me. I was only a 1-year-old baby then, and so I cannot remember what happened to Hiroshima on that day. You may wonder how it is possible for me to talk about the A-bomb experience. Every year, when August 6th came around, my mother called all of her children to sit near her. In tears, she told us about what happened to Hiroshima during those days. Sometimes my grandfather and father joined us and shared their stories of the atomic bombing. Once I asked her why she kept on telling us about her A-bomb experience despite it being such a painful memory. She said, "Because I don't want any one of you to go through such horrible experiences again." When I was a senior high school student, I read many books, photo collections, poems, and personal stories about the A-bombing in the library. I think that all these experiences and knowledge have enriched me and helped me to form my memory of the A-bomb. The A-bomb damage is not limited to what happened on August 6 and 9, 1945. The hideous A-bombings have been tormenting the survivors with long-term after-effects of radiation. My third sister lost her second son due to leukemia. It was in the summer of 1965, 20 years after the atomic bombing, that the boy suddenly lost his appetite. Sister was frightened to see that the symptoms he developed were the same as she had suffered immediately after the bombing: high fever, bleeding from the gums, and oral inflammation. After being taken to the hospital, he was diagnosed with acute lymphatic leukemia. While going in and out of the hospital, he reached school age, but he could only go to school for 10 days and died in the winter of the next year at age 7. The boy's death was widely reported then as a case of the A-bomb effects on the second generation of the Hibakusha. She too died at the young age of 56 of liver disease, which was often seen among the Hibakusha. The atomic bomb persistently haunts the lives of the Hibakusha and torments them until the end of their lives. If this is not inhumane, then what can it be described as?
まもなく被爆70年になります。平均年齢が80歳になろうとしている20万人を切った生存被爆者は大なり小なり障害を抱えています。病が被爆によるものかどうか、現代の医学では明確にできず、原爆症の認定を求めて裁判に訴えなければならない事態が続いています。被爆者が死に至るまで重い十字架を背負い続けなければならないのは何故でしょうか。再び被爆者を作るなという被爆者の心からの叫びに耳を傾け、核兵器のない世界へ確かな一歩を踏み出すことを世界の人々に訴えます。
This year marks the 70th year since the atomic bombing. Most of the 190,000 surviving victims, whose average age is close to 80, have various health problems. Even modern medical science cannot prove if their illnesses are attributed to their exposure to the A-bomb. Due to such difficulties, the Hibakusha are still forced to take legal action in court, seeking official recognition of their diseases as A-bomb related. Why are the Hibakusha forced to bear such a heavy cross until they die? I call on you to take our appeal for no more Hibakusha seriously and take a bold step forward to achieve a nuclear weapon-free world without delay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for Mr. Figumori. So the next speaker is Mr. Shinjite from South Korea.
Hello, nice to meet you. 나는 김봉대입니다. 나는 내 아내와 아들을 대신해서 여기에 왔습니다.
My name is Kim Bong-dae. I am here on behalf of my son and my wife.
내 아내는 6세 히로시마에 피복을 당했다. 내 아내는 피부병, 덩허리 종양, 다골증 등으로 한평생 고통을 받고 왔다.
At age 6, my wife survived the atomic bomb in Hiroshima, and she has suffered her entire life from skin disease, a tumor in her lower back, and osteoporosis.
내 아들 김형률이는 2005년에 희귀성 난치 질환인 선천성 면역 결합인 결핍증으로 죽었다. 원폭 유전 때문이다.
And my son, Kim Hyung-yul, died in 2005 of a rare terminal illness called congenital hemoglobin deficiency, and it was because of hereditary transmission of radiation, poisoning from the atomic bomb damage.
당시 한국인들은 전체 피복자 74만 명 중 약 10만 명으로 수용된다. 5만 명이 현장에서 죽었다.
At the time, 100,000 out of the 740,000 victims were Korean, and 50,000 died directly from the explosion.
현재 한국 원복 피해자 협회에 등록된 피복자는 2,650명에 불과하다.
Currently, there are only 2,650 survivors registered in the South Korean Atomic Bomb Victims Association.
피복 한국인들은 상당수가 일제위에 강제 동원됐던 한국인들이다.
The majority of the Korean A-bomb victims were those who had been forcibly conscripted by the colonial Japan.
한국인 피복자들은 일본의 침략 정쟁과 정량 식민 통치 피해자들이다.
So Korean A-bomb survivors are also victims of Japan's war of aggression and colonialism.
또한 한국인 원복 피해자들은 반인도적인 핵무기를 사용한 미국 준범죄의 피해자들이다.
Also, Korean A-bomb survivors are victims of war crimes by the U.S. in their anti-humanitarian use of nuclear weapons.
그러나 우리 한국인 원복 피해자들은 일본이나 미국 정부로부터 정식으로 사죄를 들어 배상을 받지 못했다.
However, the Korean victims have yet to receive any formal apology from or any type of compensation from either Japanese or U.S. governments.
내가 사는 합천에만 약 660명의 원폭 피해자가 있다. 합천은 한국은 히로시마라고 한다.
In the town of Hapcheon, where I live, there are approximately 660 atomic bomb survivors. Hapcheon is often called the Hiroshima of South Korea.
히로시마의 평화공원에는 왜 피복자들의 피폭을 당했다는지 대한 자료가 없다. 그래서 나는 합천의 진정한 세계 평화공원을 만들어야 된다고 한다.
In Hiroshima's Peace Park, there is not any information about why atomic bomb victims had to be bombed. And so in Hapcheon, we want to build another peace park commemorating the victims.
핵무기 사용을 한 미국의 책임을 묻고 핵무기 사용을 왜 금지해야 하는지 세계 여러 나라 사람들에게 알리는 평화공원을 만들고 싶다.
We want to build a peace park that questions the U.S.'s responsibility for using nuclear weapons and shows the world why we must prohibit the use of nuclear weapons.
일본 정부는 세계 유일한 핵무기 폐국이라고 한다. 33개국의 국민들이 일본에 있다가 피폭당했다. 한국, 대만, 중국, 네덜란드, 브라질.
The Japanese government identifies itself to be the only nation in the world to have been a victim to nuclear weapons. However, people from 33 different nations who were living in Japan also fell victim to the atomic bombs at the time, and they hailed from countries like South Korea, Taiwan, China, the Netherlands, and Brazil.
이 나라에 사는 피폭자들이 힘을 합쳐서 미국 정부 핵무기 사용을 책임을 묻자.
Atomic bomb victims in those nations, let us come together and demand accountability from the U.S. for its use of nuclear weapons.
용기 있는 피폭자들의 핵무기를 반대하는 평화의 애와 시민들의 목소리를 모아 핵무기가 사용할 수 없도록 이 미국 정부의 침략 전쟁에 반성해야 한다.
Peace-loving global citizens and ABOM victims, let us stand together and renounce the non-apologetic U.S. government for its use of nuclear weapons and the non-apologetic Japanese government for its aggressive wars and colonial occupation.
2013년 한국 경상도 합천 원폭 피해 1세대, 2세대, 3세대 1112명을 조사했다. 전체 범죄자들은 20.2%가 자녀 신천성 민형 기형 또는 유전성 질병이라고 대답한다.
According to a study carried out in 2013, South Gyeongsang Province in South Korea investigated 1,125 people who are either first, second, or third generation ABOM victims, and 20.2% of the descendants of survivors were found to have congenital deficiencies or hereditary diseases.
그러나 한미일은 정부 원폭 피해 유전을 인정하지 않는다.
However, the US, Japanese, and South Korean governments refuse to recognize the hereditary transmission of the ABOM damage.
내 아들 김형률이가 1,300명의 원폭 2세 한우들 핵무기의 인도적인 피해가 영구적이며 대물림된다는 것은 존중해서 증명하고 있다.
My son, Kim Hyung-yul, and the 1,300 second-generation descendants of ABOM survivors are still the living proof that the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons is permanent and is passed on through generations.
여기 전 세계 평화를 사랑하는 시민들에게 호소한다.
We call on all those who love and struggle for peace here and around the world. We ask for your support. We all want to move forward in making this a better world without nuclear weapons, but we cannot do so without taking care of the survivors.
미국은 특별법을 제정하여 진상조사를 하고 전 세계 피해자 배상에 대하여 나서야 한다.
The United States must enact a special law that will uncover the truth about the atomic bombings and compensate all atomic bomb victims around the world.
미국과 일본과 한국 정부가 한국인 원폭 피해자들의 목소리에 귀를 기울이도록 도와달라.
We ask you to help us in making the voices of Korean atomic bomb victims heard, especially by the US, Japanese, and South Korean governments. Together, we can hold your and our governments accountable.
마지막으로 세계인들은 원폭 피해를 위해서 소송을 할 수 있도록 여러분들 도와줬으면 감사하겠습니다.
Finally, I'm asking you, we want to sue these governments to ask for compensation, to hold them accountable. And if there are any citizens or lawyers who can help us in this effort, please help us.
감사합니다.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shim. So the next speaker, I'd like to invite Ms. Abacca Anjain-Maddison from Marshall Islands.
Thank you, and hello. We say Yayoi in Marshall Islands, from Marshall Islands. Yayoi. It is indeed an honor to be here by the invitation of the organizing committee, especially Gensuikyo, to speak on behalf of the people of the Marshall Islands and at this very important event around nuclear non-proliferation treaty review. I was given permission by my elderly ladies of my community, Ronglap Atoll, to tell the world what nuclear bombs can do and the greed of the power due to humankind and planet Earth. Marshall Islands was administered by several countries, foreign countries, but only the United States used Marshall Islands as a playground for the 67 hydrogen and atomic bombs testing. Immediately after World War II, starting in 1946 until 1958. A total of 67 hydrogen and atomic bombs, out of which one, by the code name Bravo Shot, detonated on March 1st, 1954, on Bikini Atoll, captivated and shocked the world because of its strength, which was 1,000 times greater than Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. The US became a superpower nation of the world. After that, also the Cold War was ended. And that all it mattered to the United States. They didn't care if there was 87, they didn't care for the 87 people on Rongelap, including children that were suffering by the nuclear fallouts. And they didn't care about neighboring islets nearby Bikini, where a lot of people were also suffering from nuclear clouds that carried debris and poisonous to their islands and their bodies. They had bigger agenda, and that was to study the radiation impact on human lives. That's when the Rongelapese people were used and called as guinea pigs. This helped, or this study really gave more power to the United States to be a superpower nation as they are. My cousin, and the thing I want to say that about Rongelapese people and Marshallese people is one small nation, and all of us, we all related to each other one way or the other. And people that I'm talking about that are victims, they're my cousin, my uncle, my aunties. And so my cousins, tell a story that she never forget how her brother was used by US doctors from Brookhaven Laboratory, lure them when they were young for medical treatment, supposedly, but only to study further about what and how the radiation is working or impacting their bodies from their surrounding, the contaminated environments, or the food that they take, or the medicines that they administer to these people. My father, Jodong Anjain, died in 1993, had 3 types of cancer in his lifetime. In 2007, the family just discovered a declassified information document that he too was used for a subject and was injected with chromium-137, and that was in 2007. My uncle John Anjain, who was the magistrate, always wondered why he was called by his number and not by his name when he's seeking medical treatment, as they say. But he only learned that he too was also a guinea pig. More and more Rongelapese people will be infected or died of cancer, and this is a report released by National Cancer Institute in the United States. Increasingly, I've seen a lot of women and children in the Marshall Islands dying or suffering from cancer, leukemia, lung cancer, breast cancer, all the cancer that is considered radiogenic illnesses. And my government is suffering from medical costs from all these illnesses, cancer illness that they have to treat, in which United States is supposed to be responsible for. The Nuclear Claims Tribunal is now closed with unpaid awards to more than 2,000 claimants, including those that have not filed because there's no use, it's closed. The people of Rongelap have given ultimatum today as we speak. They're building houses on the contaminated homeland. The ultimatum given by United States that either they return home or funds will be put on hold. As you hear about all these unjust, inhumane actions that have caused our lives or are causing complication and hardship to our lives, the list goes on and on and on. So what does it mean? Why is it a big deal to talk about? Well, clearly where nuclear bomb exists or used, there are always secrets, lies. The bottom line, nuclear bomb bring nothing except destructions and sufferings. I'd like to tell you the occasions that of several of my cousins. They were interviewed by journalists, students from British Columbia 2 weeks ago in my kitchen. These are ladies that are survivors, a little over 70 years old. There's about 27 survivors living today out of 87. And so they were asked what they want to tell America after all these. And they said, our land is sacred. It is very essence of our survival and our identity. The nuclear bomb contaminated the soil and kept us apart. Since 1984, America, we won our islands back, free of radiation like how God gave us in the beginning. All of it has to be cleaned. Lemoyne also said that in these words, she said, without my permission, my life, my body, my dignity, my rights, my land were taken away and used for the benefit of the United States to be a superpower nation of the world today. I want to tell America, it's your turn. Live up to your moral responsibilities. We want closure. The third question is what they think of Marshall Islands suing the nuclear states, countries in the International Court of Justice. They said, it's a moral act. It is the right thing to do. There is nothing good the bomb can bring to humankind. And my cousin, Lemoyne further said, in life, children and grandchildren are supposed to inherit valuables. But in my case, just listen, in my case, my children, my grandchildren will inherit homelessness, health effects, and death. I feel ashamed. I feel worthless for my children and grandchildren. And when they were asked finally what they like to tell the world, they said, the world should learn from our experiences. Survivors means your children will inherit effects, health effects, homelessness, and they will also pass on their inheritance of all these horrible things to their children and grandchildren. In closing, I would like to make an appeal to you, brothers and sisters. Now is the time, today. Let us all make a stand to say no more nuclear weapons. Let us join hands and make the world leaders. Hear us now and support Marshall Islands with the International Court of Justice case. For the sake of our planet Earth and our children and grandchildren, we shall overcome. Thank you.
Abacca, thank you very much for your moving story. So next speaker is Mr. Pino from Acoma-Laguna Coalition for a Safe Environment. Mr. Pino, please.
Go'azi. Hello in my language. Why don't you try to say hello in my language? Go'azi. Pretty good, easy. Thank you. As I mentioned yesterday in my comments at the open plenary last evening, I was bestowed with the honor in 2010 of traveling to Japan during that week in August 6th and August 9th, commemorating the 65th anniversary of the bombing at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. While there, I toured numerous nuclear facilities on the Sea of Japan on the west coast. I was not able to go on the Pacific coast where the Daiichi Fukushima nuclear power plant was located. But I noticed that all these nuclear power plants were located near bodies of water. And I thought about earthquakes, I thought about tsunamis. You know, this was 6 months before the attack occurred. People were swimming in beaches in close proximity to the plant, meeting with different Japanese governmental officials, both in the Diet and near nuclear facilities. I was continually told that nuclear power was a safe solution, right? And consequently, in March, on that day when the catastrophe occurred, we now have, according to some of my activist friends in Japan, a different feeling from the Japanese people about nuclear power. In my area, as I mentioned last night, the historical connection to that incident, right? The uranium coming from indigenous lands in Japan, in Canada, in the Northwest Territories, the uranium that was used in testing the bombs before Fat Man and Little Boy were shipped to Japan came from the Navajo Nation in Arizona and New Mexico. The testing of the nuclear weapons at the White Sands Missile Range, impacting the Mescalero Apache people to this very day as a downwind population to that nuclear testing. The building of the bomb at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, in Los Alamos, New Mexico, the Oppenheimer Project, that I saw at the Hibakusha Survivors Museum in Hiroshima. They have a whole section there dedicated to Los Alamos. And it made me real angry because we're still, as Pueblo people of New Mexico, Acoma Pueblo, where I'm from, is one of 19 pueblos. And around the Los Alamos National Laboratories is situated about 6 other pueblos, the northern pueblos north of Santa Fe, New Mexico. And to this day, we have found impacts not only to human health, but to our living relatives, our four-legged relatives, deer, elk, mountain lion, bear, our relatives that live in the Rio Grande water. We've seen deformities in fish, even deformities in small rodents like prairie dogs, squirrels, chipmunks. So not only are humans suffering, but the entire living world as a result of the development of these weapons of mass destruction. As mentioned by my sister from the Marshall Islands, I just saw a very moving documentary called Nuclear Savage. And when European colonizers came to the United States, they depicted indigenous peoples, not only of North America, but South America and Central America as well, as savages, right? Because we were basically non-Christian people, right? The savagery that we were labeled with resulted in justification of the United States government to steal our land. As I mentioned last night, the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty is only one of over 500 treaties the United States has broken impacting indigenous peoples. In fact, we still have unsolved litigation of numerous treaties imposed by the United States government that are still unresolved. So using this type of labels, applications in governmental policy, in laws, has resulted in the illegal taking of our mother homeland that we, as consensus, I know most of the tribes throughout the Western Hemisphere refer to Earth as mother. Right? In this nuclear savagery in the development of nuclear weapons in my homeland was situated the Jackpile Mine, which grew to be the largest open-pit uranium mine in the world. 25 million tons of ore were mined from that facility between 1952 and 1983 when it closed. Of those 25 million tons of ore, 90% went to the Department of Defense of the United States to make weapons of mass destruction. Consequently, today in that village, like the Japanese survivors, like the survivors of the Marshall Island, the village of Powati is a contaminated community. As I mentioned last night, we have cancer clusters in that community. We've documented the impacts to the environment, to the water, to the soils. The United States government used that open pit mine as an example for reclamation, trying to return the land to its natural state after mining. And we were continually told that this reclamation of the Jackpile mine was successful. However, in 2012, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the Department of Energy said that the Jackpile mine was still emitting levels of radiation that were unsafe to the environment and to humans. So now they're going to have to go back and do the job over. Right? How many times have we been told that by the industry that these processes are safe, right? That they're in the name of the defense of our country, right? That we can create expendable populations in other parts of the world. As a survivor from, as the survivor Mr. Tae from Korea just mentioned, you know, who's responsible, right? Who's legally responsible, and how do we as victims of this nuclear savage madness get any compensation from nation states of the world that have developed this type of weaponry, that have used our homelands for testing facilities? Back home in the United States, we have had atomic bomb testing on the lands of the Western Shoshone at the Nevada test site, where bombs were tested before the Cold War with Russia, right? In fact, some of my friends from Western Shoshone say they are the most bombed nation in the world, as underground testing and above ground testing took place during the 1960s. At the Hanford Nuclear Reservation in Washington State, there's stockpiled more nuclear waste than almost anywhere else in the world. Downstream live indigenous people, Umatillas, Yakimas, Spokane Indians. The Spokane River is so contaminated that the Spokane people are told not to eat the salmon. Because this is part of their traditional livelihood, the traditional culture, they continue to eat the fish. In New Mexico, where all these abandoned uranium mines, over 1,500 on the Navajo Nation alone, exist, when winds blow, and they can blow in the southwestern United States in excess of 60 miles an hour, these nuclear contaminants are blown all over creation. Many of these people rely on livestock, sheep and cattle, as their major food source. And these grazing areas where these animals graze are eating contaminated grass, which gets into the food chain that impacts our populations. How do we amend the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty to make these nation states of the world accountable, to create methods of compensation to populations like the Marshall Islanders, the Hibakusha survivors, indigenous peoples in the United States and Canada, and throughout Central and South America, where disproportionate populations suffer from these types of atrocities? I ask the future generations of students globally that this is your responsibility. I started in this area of research, of activism, when I was about 26 years old. I am now 63, and I have not seen the United States accountable to the devastation that they've created throughout the world, destroying our mother, the earth. It's time we unify as a global population to make these nation states that created this destruction of all living things throughout the world to compensate, to be legally responsible for the destruction that they've committed. The United States has not yet answered to those over 450 broken treaties. And they're not going to answer to the devastation that they create globally unless we unify and make them accountable. And I believe that goal is achievable. I hope that in my lifetime, I can see that come to reality. And as you young people are the future generations, as I tell our indigenous students here in the United States, you are the future. Do you want to continue to live with this nuclear madness? You know, are you going to continue to be the problem, or are you going to be the solution? And I thank you very much for your time. And I'm very honored to be sitting here with this panel today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pino, and he made clear the whole picture of the damage of nuclear weapons in the USA, and not only that, I think we could understand the struggle of indigenous people and American people against nuclear weapons. So the next speaker, we were supposed to get Mr. Peter Watts, Aboriginal nuclear test victim from Australia, but unfortunately, he cannot arrive here in time. He has been marching toward New York to join our international action, but due to some logical mistakes, he cannot be here, but he asked us to read his story. So my colleague Rieko will read his story for him.
Good morning, people. My name is Peter Watts. I am an indigenous person of the Arabana Nation, which is in the far north of South Australia. From the early 1950s, the English and Australian military carried out a number of nuclear tests over the continent of Australia. There were 12 major nuclear explosions and more than 400 minor trials, which scattered radioactive particles all over the desert. Some of these were very close to my people's land, where they were living at that time. These bombs tests started at Montebello, an island off the coast of Western Australia. The other two test sites were west of my people's country at Emu Field and Maralinga. All the weather comes from the west, blowing all that fallout from the bombs over the people and the land. Many Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in the region and beyond must have also been affected, but still are not aware of the connection between the bomb tests and any future illnesses. In 2012, I visited Japan, and after speaking with many Japanese people, both from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, about their experiences of the atomic bombs, I realized how similar our stories were. At that time, some people made that connection even clearer when they referred to me and my family as Hibakusha. Over the years, there must be thousands, if not millions, of Hibakusha around the world. Together, we must all work to ensure there are no more Hibakusha. Looking at my family tree, my mother and I began to join up the dots and to build a clear picture of the links to the bomb tests. My grandmother died at 34 years of age of unknown causes after having 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. My mother being a young girl at that time and the eldest of all her siblings. Mom's other sister, the 3rd eldest, had a baby that passed away after a day or 2. My mother lost a son the same way. He died after a day or 2. My brother's body was taken by the authorities for radiation testing, and it was more than 40 years before his remains were returned to my parents. My grandmother's youngest daughter cannot now have children. All of my aunties and uncles have been affected in some way, whether it be deformed babies dying as an infant or their children, my cousins not being able to have babies. Other family members in my extended family have had children with deformities. Many others have thyroid cancers and numerous other health issues. Many people from my region have already passed away, not being aware of the connections. Anywhere east of that area across the whole continent of Australia, many people would have been affected. A cleanup of Maralinga site has been carried out, but still the problems remain some 60 years later and will for generations to come. And the challenges continue. Arabana County is the source of massive amounts of water consumed by Australia's largest uranium mine. run by the world's largest mining company, BHP Billiton's Olympic Dam uranium mine. Our community has come full circle from the impacts of nuclear testing to those of uranium mining. And now we are connected about new state governments. Now we are concerned about new state government plans to expand the nuclear industry in South Australia, including considering allowing high-level radioactive waste from around the world to be stored in our state. We have lived with the consequences of nuclear tests and the wider nuclear industry for over 60 years. It has shortened lives and damaged lives, and we are sick and tired of being sick and tired. It is time to end the nuclear experiment and give justice to those who have suffered from it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all victim speakers. So now we finish the presentations from victim speakers, and I'd like to move to the next part of our workshop, and the Remembering Hiroshima, Imagining Peace will present about their activities. And let me introduce three members of their organization: Ms. Taylor Hennesse and Anne Rosenthal and Joe Schlesinger. So these three people will present the activities.
Thank you for including us in this important conference. My name is Joe Schlesinger, and also as a member, I am the community organizer for the Coalition for Peace Action in Western Pennsylvania. My introduction to Remembering Hiroshima, Imagining Peace was when a group of Sonoran labor activists from Japan came to Pittsburgh on their way to the UN for the last NPT. That was April 30th, 2010. I was then moved by their testimonies, as I am again here today, and inspired to get involved. Through them, I learned how many people traveled to New York City to add their voices to this global urgent issue. And this year, I am happy to be here among you, almost 5 years later to the day. We have the first slide, please. In 2008, a diverse group of organizations and individuals came together to commemorate the anniversary of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Each year, we continue to communicate a message of peace and opposition to nuclear weapons through art, education, and activism. Next slide. We are a volunteer effort that has involved an unusually broad group of organizations and individuals. You can identify many familiar peace groups, but we also create partnerships with allies at the Thomas Merton Center, local universities, the Children's Museum, a filmmaker organization, local artists, and a union, the United Electrical Radio and Machine Workers of America, a diverse group to be sure. Additional grassroots groups have joined us for specific programs along the way, but we each share an individual and collective commitment to end nuclear weapons and war. I'd now like to introduce Anne Rosenthal, a member and also an environmental artist and activist.
Next slide. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. And as Joe said, I'm very honored to be up here with all these amazing speakers and hearing their experiences. Art in its various forms, from hands-on art making with children through art exhibitions to films, has been central to our creative peacemaking strategies. In these efforts, we have partnered with local organizations and institutions to build community and to expand our audience. Next slide. In 2011, we mounted an exhibition of artwork, including some of my own, related to the atomic bombings and living in the atomic age. And this exhibition included both my own work, political cartoons from one of our members, Gary Huck, and books that address the themes of nuclear war and energy at the Hunt Library, Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. Spanning several floors, the exhibition reached a wide audience from the campus, students, faculty, and it was open to the public. Next. Over the last few years, we have partnered with the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh in creative projects that actively engage children who visited the museum. In the upper left photo, Jo, who just spoke, is guiding children at the museum in folding cranes as she explains the story of Sadako, who I think you're all familiar with that story. This last year, we worked with the museum and guest artists who led children in the Japanese technique of shibori, or indigo tie-dye. Members of our group greeted visitors, as you can see here on the right, greeted visitors and explained to them what we were doing and why we were doing it, that we were commemorating the 69th anniversary of the atomic bombings. The children wrote messages of peace and friendship on sticks or stones, which they then wrapped with cotton cloth, and then that cloth was dyed. So we ended up with these squares of indigo tie-dyed cotton material, and then the museum shop made them into 4 beautiful quilts. Next, which you can see here. So we there was an exhibit at the museum of these quilts. And then last weekend, next slide. Last weekend, the museum held a ceremony in which they handed off the quilts to us. And you can see it was really a lovely ceremony that included a violinist, and at the end, sending off the quilts through this release of doves that children at the museum and passerbys participated in. And then you can see in the lower right, the museum education director handing off the quilts to Joe. So while we are here tomorrow, we will present 2 of the quilts to the New Japan Women's Association, and one of the quilts will end up hanging at the Chichiro, thank you, the Chichiro, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right, Art Museum, Azumino in Nagano. So yes, we're very proud of this project that's really lasted almost a year now. Thank you. And that these quilts that represent our hopes for peace and had many hands on them from children in Pittsburgh will be going to Japan, where children in Japan can see them as well as their parents, and I hope many of you. Next slide. Films have also been a significant part of our programming for the last several years. We have partnered with Pittsburgh Filmmakers, which operates 3 independent movie theaters. These are just a sampling of the films we have shown, including what was mentioned a little earlier, Nuclear Savage. These are all very powerful films that have included topics such as the atomic bombings, nuclear testing, nuclear power, and the long-term storage of nuclear waste. These films are international, and they include documentaries as well as anime, as you can see on the right, The Grave of the Fireflies, and vividly portray the impacts on people and the environment. Following the films, which we usually present on one of the anniversaries, is a Skype session with students and activists from Japan, which Joe will discuss a little later. Now I will turn this over to Taylor Hennesse, who will discuss our education programs. Taylor is a recent graduate of the Public and International Affairs Master's Program at the University of Pittsburgh. Thank you.
Konnichiwa. I learned of Remembering Hiroshima, Imagining Peace during an exchange program in which I studied at Kobe Daigaku, Japan. At Kobe, my advisor taught a peace and development course, and through class discussions, she became aware of my passion for environmental and social justice, and then informed me of a diverse activist group in Pittsburgh, Remembering Hiroshima, Imagining Peace. Once I returned from my semester abroad, I contacted Remembering Hiroshima, Imagining Peace, and immediately joined their grassroots efforts. Education is a large part of our programs. I will now share some of the ways we have informed and continue to inform the public on the effects of nuclear weapons and nuclear energy. Next slide, please. So the Hiroshima-Nagasaki Legacy exhibit was mounted in the city-county building for 2 weeks and during the anniversary of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The exhibit featured photographs, graphics, poetry, and artwork produced by individuals who witnessed the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The exhibit educated viewers about the consequences of the use of nuclear weapons. The morning we assembled the panels for the exhibit, people hurried to their offices, briefly stopped, glanced at the panels, and had an array of reactions. Some were positive, while others glanced with disgust. Next slide, please. Our range of scholars and experts have provoked thought and challenged assumptions amongst community members and students. Our guest lectures often take place at or near universities. Location is key to involve younger generations. Students are busy, so convenience of location is one approach to getting higher student attendance. Artist Ellen O'Hara, upper left, is a professor of visual art, theory, and practice at the University of North Carolina. Her lecture, After Hiroshima, provided insight into her images of artifacts from the Peace Museum in Hiroshima, Japan. She used the historic technique of cyanotype, laying objects on treated paper and then exposing them to sunlight. The objects, which were exposed to the effects of the atom bomb, are rendered as ghostly white silhouettes. Ellen also signed her catalog on the project. Joseph Gerson, upper right, as we are all familiar with, the American Friends Service Committee Disarmament Coordinator, discussed his books on nuclear weapons in war and nuclear extortion, followed by a Q&A on the current state of nuclear weapons and power. The other two individuals shown on the lower half of this slide presented their creative efforts to educate the public on the consequences of nuclear power, highlighting the displacement of citizens. Dr. Alexander is a professor of peace education. She was also my advisor while I studied at Kobe University in Japan. In 2006, she used her academic background to initiate a grassroots project, the Popoki Peace Project. She has written several books that explore how humans and animals experience and think about peace. During her lecture at the University of Pittsburgh, she introduced some stories from the Fukushima disaster area. The last photograph on this slide is of Pradeep Indolkar, filmmaker and whistleblower. He introduced his film High Power and led a discussion afterward. High Power portrayed villagers' stories of being forced out of their homes due to the negative health and environmental effects from a nearby nuclear power plant. Next slide, please. So lastly, we have held discussions. This one in particular was titled Grappling with Nuclear Power. Grappling with Nuclear Power was a stimulating discussion hosted at the University of Pittsburgh. 4 experts in the field presented on sustainability and nuclear energy. The experts shared their contrasting opinions on nuclear energy. For this event, we partnered with an engineering student group at Pitt. Many of our lectures are co-hosted by student groups, which provide relationship building with younger generations. Pittsburgh has several universities, so we take our efforts to as many campuses as possible. There are several approaches to educating and engaging younger generations. Lectures hosted at university campuses is only one approach. We also provide information online through our website, our Facebook page, and through other social media. So now, Joe will share how we used activism to involve the public in ways we have taken immediate action. Thank you.
Next slide, please. And you can do the next slide. This slide is Pittsburgh City Council, when they issued a proclamation recognizing our advocacy work and calling for the acceleration and the reduction of nuclear weapons. We involve our local city government by developing relationships with our elected officials, especially those that we disagree with. As Republicans and Democrats come and go, we annually commemorate the anniversary dates with a proclamation calling for a world free of nuclear weapons. The proclamation has also included language about the reduction of stockpiles, handling procedures, and the risks of nuclear power. In 2012, we were able to get our very conservative mayor to join Mayors for Peace. He is now one of 203 U.S. mayors whose mission is to eradicate nuclear weapons by 2020. Throughout the year, there have been opportunities to collect petitions and have letter writing campaigns to local and statewide elected officials on related legislation such as the nuclear weapons budget. And as Taylor said, our Facebook page, website, and listserv alert our members to ongoing events and issues. Next slide. The Shadow Project is a project that's often done around the world. And over the years, we have done this Shadow Project in public spaces throughout the city. As you know, Shadow Projects attempt to replicate the powerful image to remind the public of the horrors of a nuclear war. This simple project allows for a graphic illustration of the consequences of nuclear war and invites discussion of both young and old. We've made kits with chalk, instructions, and literature for people to create their own shadow projects. In 2012, after a day of shadow projects, we concluded the day with an outpouring from local artists who generously donated their talents. It included folk singers, poets, actors, a representative from our U.S. Senator, and a slideshow of nuclear war and the shadows made earlier in the day. Next slide. We are fortunate to have a relationship with Dr. Alexander at Kobe University. And for many years, we Skype with them on August the 6th. After a nuclear-themed film showing in Pittsburgh and at the conclusion of the Peace Park event commemorating Hiroshima, we have been able to dialogue directly with students from Kobe University. In addition to the discussion of the aftermath of war and a commitment to peace, we have recently explored other issues such as Fukushima and Article 9. These personal opportunities to share our stories and express ourselves have been both meaningful and energizing. By engaging the public, involving local governments, and creating partnerships, we can synergize our efforts. These collaborations help build community and prompt social action. This August, we will be using the anniversary dates to partner with Bike Pittsburgh, Global Zero, and the City of Pittsburgh to have a Bike Around the Bomb all ages event. It will be yet another opportunity to remember Hiroshima and imagine peace. Thank you.
So to conclude our presentation here, before we invite you to ask questions of any of us and to tell us and for us to have a discussion about how you're addressing the issues, I'll just, we've got one more slide, a couple more slides there. There you go, thank you. Okay, so in conclusion, we have pursued our creative peacemaking, as you just have seen, through art, education, and activism. Art includes hands-on art making, art exhibitions, and films that engage all ages through tactile and sensory experiences that awaken the mind and the heart. Education provides multiple perspectives presented by experts along with public discussion and dialogue that provokes thought and challenges assumptions. Activism directly involves the public and local government to build community and prompt action. All of our work is about building relationships across disciplines such as art, history, science, and the environment, between organizations such as museums, universities, and cultural institutions, and among various public groups, children and adults, academic and labor organizations, students, and professionals. I want to say just a final word here as an artist that I really encourage you to reach out to the artists and art institutions in your communities and partner with them on projects. Art is a very emotive way, a very engaging way to address these issues and get the involvement of the public. And artists really want to make a difference in the world, and many of them, I think, would welcome the opportunity to work with you. So you can, if you don't know artists in your region, you can connect with arts organizations, museums, and public art councils. So just one final thing I want to leave you with, which is a quote from architect and designer William McDonough, who received a MacArthur Genius Grant and is very well known and very inspiring. And one of the things he asks, which I will leave you with today, is how can we love all the children of all species for all time? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Remembering Hiroshima and imagining peace. As a Japanese peace activist, I was very much encouraged to hear the report of their activity to keep Hiroshima to be remembered. Because in Japan, we have the similar activities for almost 60 years. And we are happy to know that the same activity has been carried out here in the USA. Now, we want to have, though it is very short, we want to have Q&A or opinion, a discussion time. Perhaps we can have 15 minutes or 20 minutes because I need to leave time to panelists for their last comment. So perhaps only a few people can ask questions or raise your opinions. So if you want to say something or if you want to ask them, please raise your hand. Only one? What about some people from Japanese movement? Because you are doing the very creative and similar activities like them. You have suggestion? Okay. So the first...
As evinced by all the youth here today, when we hear about from the Hibakusha directly your experiences and have the chance to visit Hiroshima and Nagasaki and other opportunities like that, I think it's almost impossible not to be galvanized to join the cause. But for my classmates at Boston College who didn't have those opportunities, I wonder if the Hibakusha specifically can speak to maybe ways to connect what you've been through to the experiences and lives of college students today. Thank you.
Thank you. Then.
Yes, Ani, I am Lorraine Reckmans, Anishinaabe Kwe from Serpent River First Nation. I really can't stand people who don't pay their bills. I don't know why, but deadbeats really get under my skin. And we heard yesterday about $1 trillion investment into, a new generation of nuclear weapons. And I heard from every one of you today about reparation and, just that there's a moral obligation, a financial responsibility on the part of the United States to pay its bills, to pay the debt that it owes to the people of the world. I know sometimes in Canada when we have our budgets passed, we have the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives prepare another budget, the budget that the people would really like to see. And I think that if we did a budget for the United States of America, we would find that there is a huge liability on the balance sheet, and that the United States is likely financially bankrupt from the bills that it has not paid. And I would like to know if there is any work being done on this side, on the accounting side, to demonstrate that the United States can't afford this $1 trillion. And so I just would like to put that out there. Thank you.
Okay, please.
I came from South Korea, and I am an attorney at law. 저는 한국에서 왔는 변호사인데요. 지금 여기에서 지금 이게 이 피폭자들이 전 세계 그 원폭 피해자들이 다 모이셨는데 이런 행사에 지금 여기 매스컴 관계자들이 미디어에게서 오신 분들 한 분인지 한번 들어보고 싶거든요. 그리고 지금 그리고 이 지금 한국에서 피폭자들이 지금 한국 정부를 상대로 현재 재판을 하고 있습니다. 이 피폭자들이 한국 정부를 상대로 하고 손해배상 소송을 하고 있는데 이 문제를 완전히 해결하기 위해 가지고는 미국 정부를 상대로 재판을 이어가야 되는데 이 피해자들이 나서지 않으면은 이게 재판이 안 되거든요. 그래서 이건 관련되어 가지고 지금 5월 3일 날 미국 정부를 상대로 5월 4일 미국 정부를 상대로 재판을 이어가려고 하는데 여기에 관심 있는 분은 그때 좀 오셔가지고 같이 협력할 수 있는 방법을 찾았으면 좋겠습니다. Thank you.
I am a South Korean attorney, and currently in South Korea, we are in the process of suing the South Korean government for compensations for the victims of Korean atomic bomb victims. And we were interested to know if there was anybody or any organizations here who would like to help us in suing the U.S. government for compensation so that they would take responsibility for the damage they've caused to these Korean atomic bomb victims. So we are speaking on May 4th at the MPT conference at UN. If you'd like to hear more about what we hope to do, and we can talk after these discussions if you are interested in joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any Japanese? Okay.
My name is Keiko Majima from Japan, and I'm a member of New Japan Women's Association, and I'm a graduate of Kobe University. I was very moved your speech. 今から日本語で言います。すみません。3人の広島の方のですね。お礼もアプリシエーションという日本の新婦人でもどうやって若い方に運動を広げるかということを考えています。それが課題です。で、今日お話を聞いて大変感動したし参考にもなりました。私たち若い方っていうともう新婦人で若い、私今年60歳になるんですけれども若いと言われているんですね。それだけもう新婦人では70代80代の方が頑張ってるんですけど若い方っていうと30代40代を考えるんですがやっぱり子どもたちの教育というか子どもたちへどう働きかけるかっていうことを新婦人でも考えていかなくちゃいけないんだなと思いました。前教員をしてたんですけれども平和教育をしていました。でも知識の方が多かったんですね。今日お話にあったアートとそういったものが本当に大事だなということが分かりました。原爆をね落としたことを悪いと思っているアメリカ
So I want to say thank you to all the panelists for their presentations. So how to approach the younger generations and involve them is a very big challenge for us in the New Japan Women's Association. And so the presentation that I heard from the Remembering Hiroshima today was very moving, and I learned a lot from their activities. So I am 60 years old, but among the members of the New Japan Women's Association, sometimes I am described as young members because we have so many veteran activists in their 70s and 80s. And we have to involve more younger members in their 30s, 20s, 30s, and 40s. But in order to involve them, I also learned that it's very important to involve their children in such peace activities. So that I also learned. And because I used to be a teacher, so I was also involved in the peace education. But what we were thinking about was, I think, was always what we should teach to children. But I learned that involving them through art and through their physical activities was very important too.
私たちも日本でいろいろ活動はしてるんですけれども、私たち以上にアメリカでいろんな活動をしてあるということをお聞きして大変感動しましたし、そういうことを日本の仲間のみんなにもですね伝えたいと思っています。思いがけずこういった取り組みのお話を聞けてアメリカに13時間かけて来たんですが、飛行機とても怖い私が初めて海外へ来たんですけれども、本当に良かったと思っています。Thank you very much.
So I felt very encouraged to know that there are many people also in the United States working at the grassroots level in the similar activities that we have. And I want to take what I've learned here today back to Japan and spread among our people and wider public. So I felt my trip, 13-hour trip on the plane for the first time, I was very afraid of this trip, but was really worth, and I was very glad to learn a lot of things from you. Thank you very much.
I want to get one more person, in particular young person. Yeah, impression from their stories and whatever. One young person. Does anybody say something? Okay. Only one. I'm sorry, only one.
Yeah.
Microphone, please. Yeah, but the answer will be given later in their last comment. Is it or okay? Okay. Then.
I'm actually writing a book, or rather, I've finished writing 2 books on the anti-nuclear movement in Japan and the way music is used in it. And I'm currently working on another book that looks at sonic contestations of nuclear power. And since we have such a variety of hibakusha, from all over the world on stage, in the Q&A, I would be very interested to know how you might have channeled music or sound to either aid in your healing or in protesting nuclear power. We've seen a presentation about activism and how art has been channeled into activism, but I would like to hear how hibakusha yourselves have channeled music either for your own healing or protest.
Okay, I'm sorry. It was very short time, but I'd like to close the discussion time. So we have 20 minutes more. So I'd like to ask each panelist to make a final comment, and one from your group. And so from Mr. Figumori. So perhaps each panelist can have 3 or 4 minutes. So please, Mr. Figumori.
たくさんの感想をいただきました。で、全てにお答えしたい気持ちはいっぱいあるんですけども、4分間って限られるとお答えするのは限られてしまいます。先ほど被爆者にどんなことで癒しているかという お話がありました。これは芸術はもちろんですが、その他にもスポーツもありますし、それぞれ自分の子供、孫の成長などもですね、本当に辛い思いをしてきた被爆者の心を慰めるというか、そこに期待を抱いて、この子たちに絶対同じ体験をさせてはならないという思いを振り起こさせてくれます。そういうことも被爆者の心を癒す力になっていると私は思います。それでも子供や孫が、いつ病気になるかという心配も片方であります。被爆者はですから心を癒しながらもまた怯えながらもという日常を送っていますので、やはりこれは核兵器は、何をどうやってもやっぱり人と共存できないということを日々感じております。時間がないので以上で終わりますが、もし機会がありましたらしっかりお話ししたいと思います。皆さんと。はい。
So thank you very much for all your questions, and I have only 4 minutes to answer all these questions, so I may not be able to do that. There was a question about how the Hibakusha are trying to heal their wounds, and of course art is one way for us in various art, music, and also the sports activities is also a good way if we can take part. And another important thing is to see the growth of our children and our grandchildren. It's very healing for us to see them grow, and they give us a hope for the future. And they always remind us of our mission, that we have to make sure that the tragedy that we have gone through should not be repeated on them. So they are the constant reminder of our important task. At the same time, they are the support of our life, and they are the encouragement of our life to go on. But at the same time, we are always concerned about their future, about the possible illness that they have to develop as a result of our experience. So both the healings and concerns are from them. And that means that our conclusion is that we have to abolish all nuclear weapons, because the humans cannot coexist with nuclear weapons. And I want to continue our dialogue about all the Hibakusha's feelings and the thinking, but maybe we have another time to do that when we have other chance and more time. Thank you very much.
저는 오늘 이 회의 장소가 너무나 답답해서 다시 이 자리에 올랐습니다. 저는 대한민국의 그 합천 원폭 지부라는 그 회원을 담당하고 있는 지부장 심진태입니다.
Today I was sitting here and I feel, a lot of sadness, and I feel like so much is unsaid. So I came here to speak. My name is Kim Jin-tae, as you know, and I'm a leader of the Hapcheon anti-nuclear organization.
지금 앞에 질문하는 그 학생 보기에도 좀 부끄러운 생각이었습니다. 지금까지 우리 원폭이 어떻게 했길래 이 고가세도 원폭이라는 얘기가 나오기 때문에 저렇게 질문이 돌아도 답변이 잘 없습니다.
And a lot of young people have spoken up and asking for answers, and to be honest, like I feel so much sadness because there's a lot of inaction and there's a lot of apathy around this issue.
오늘 여러분들이 설명하신 것은 70년 동안 또 실험에서 60년 동안 다 겪고 아는 그런 사항을 여러분들이 설명했습니다.
All the all these things, all these painful experiences that Hibakushas and other people around the world have shared today, we know this. We have been demanding change for 60 years, 70 years now.
이런 결과는 저는 여기 끝을 맺고 오늘 결실로 맺어봐 싶은 여러분께 동의를 얻고 싶습니다.
And so, we have a lot of words, we say a lot of words, but what we really, really need is to take action. And so there's something that I want to ask all of you.
예, 우리 일세가 이세에게 미룰 수도 없고 이제는 연세가 다 70 이상 들었으니까 오늘 이 자리에서 각 피해자들이 한 자리에 모였으니까 여기에 대표자를 만들어서 여러분들이 어서야 따르겠습니다만 해도 유엔이나 미국이나 이런 데다가 소송을 할 수 있는 그런 기구를 이 자리에서 만들어내야 됩니다.
A lot of people here, the victims and survivors are over 70 years old and over 80 years old, and so we don't have much time to sit around and do nothing, and we really, need to take action now. And my suggestion is we have hibakushas, we have victims and survivors from all around the world here today, and I ask if we can, set up some type of organization, some type of committee, representing all these different folks from around the world, so we can make some kind of demands at the UN or at, against the U.S. government to hold them accountable.
제가 생각하기로는 이 미국에 우선 우리 피해자들이 많으니까 여기에 책임을 져서 인권을 보호하는 이 변호사님을 선임해가지고 우리가 이 피해자 여러 나라에서 협력을 합쳐서 우선 국제재판에 대응을 하는 것이 필요하다고 생각합니다. 여러분들 어떻게 생각하십니까?
And a lot of people here, the Japanese survivors, or, the from indigenous nations or Marshall Islands survivors, a lot of these damages are inflicted by the U.S. government. So, I really want the U.S. government to take responsibility. And why don't we gather together and, get a human rights activist, a lawyer, and we can all ask U.S. government to take responsibility for all these different issues, but it's the same culprit. So why can't we act together?
네, 여러분께서 여기에 생각대로 동의를 해주시면 오늘 결성을 하는 걸로 하겠습니다.
I'm asking all of us to take an action together, and I really think we can do this together. So, what do you think about my idea? And I really want us to take action together.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you.
To answer your question about music and healing, in fact, Marshallese people do not have words for bomb, and we don't have, there's no words for people that were affected by a bomb. We call it, in Marshallese we say, Ribam. Ribam means people of bomb. And so many, the scientific words like leukemia and all the other radiogenic illnesses, we don't have words for them because we never experienced them before. And so to educate, they're put in songs. And when they were, when the Ronglabis were medically treated, that's how we learn what they did to them, because they were singing about the man that was manning the X-ray, the guy that was collecting urine, and the nurse that was collecting blood samples. They put in song just to heal their minds and also to share and educate and try to, just let it out through songs. And they have a lot of those men and women compose those songs. especially songs about their moving from their homeland. It's very, very touching and very sad. And so they continue to, as they experience new hardship, they also put in music, in songs. And Marshallese people are very humble, and our culture provides a way for us to help each other out mentally and socially. And so we are, but the nuclear issue is just too big for us to handle. And so only songs we feel that also help us as a healing. I'd like to thank the opportunity for being here. I feel the power coming from all of you. As we have a saying in Marshall Islands is that Kowa Merong. Koba Merong. That means together we are power, and so we should continue this. Today and now is time for action. We shouldn't wait every 5 years to come together and say, all we want to say. But I'm very encouraged, and I really look forward to this year and this time that we will achieve our goal. So we share all overcome. Komol Tata.
To briefly address the questions and comments regarding compensation, here in the United States, it's been a very difficult process to get Congress's ear, the federal government's ear, regarding the devastation to these populations and to the earth. Here in the United States, petitioning the federal government for a congressional bill, a congressional act, which became a reality in 1990, called the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. Under that piece of legislation, only 3 populations were targeted for monetary compensation from the U.S. government. Those were atomic veterans that were present at test sites, much like on the Marshall Island, but didn't say anything about victims. Atomic veterans and populations who were downwind from these test sites, and underground uranium miners. Those were the 3 populations that were eligible for compensation under the initial act. We immediately went to work in our communities to lobby Congress and say, why just these 3 populations? What about all the other victims, some that didn't even work in the industry but are victims of where they live? Or what about all the other employees that were involved in the uranium mining and milling industry? Or truck drivers, people that worked at mills, people that worked at crushing sites. These people were exposed to high levels of radioactive contaminants, yet they weren't targeted for compensation. It took 10 years of lobbying continuously to the United States government to get them to include those working populations. In 2000, we amended the act. Numerous environmental activists, indigenous tribal governments, indigenous peoples, workers, atomic veterans, all those populations, we worked in unity in trying to get this act changed, and we were successful to get all uranium workers and a greater capacity of downwinders in the compensation process, right? Now, how the United States government can spend all this money on the nuclear industrial complex, but come down with an equation in the compensation process says that if you can prove that you were in these populations, you get $100,000. How do you put a dollar value on a human life is the first question. And why that measly amount in comparison to the charts that we saw yesterday spent on by the US military on weapons? Their priority should be compensating victims and not, this is only domestic law. What about the international populations that we've impacted throughout the world? No compensation there, right? So the other flaw with the Radiation Workers' Compensation Act is that it only compensates workers up to 1971. And the US government says this in their logic and line of reasoning. They say, well, the US can't be solely responsible for compensation when at that time of transition, the nuclear industry became global. What about the bombs? Who's the only country, as I said yesterday, to use a nuclear weapon? You know, as Indian people, historically over time, we were the experiments of different type of weaponry during the Indian wars of the late 1800s, just like the Hibakusha, right? Nobody's ever been compensated for that. Quickly to answer the young lady from, is it Boston University or Boston College that you talked about organizing? I think that as students, right, many times we have to think outside the box, outside the institution, and involve ourselves with activist organizations like we have represented here. Right? That gives you a first-hand knowledge of what impacted populations are experiencing, the work that these fine ladies in Pittsburgh are doing. It gives you access to the information, right, that you can take and educate your other students. We had a tremendous help in developing a curriculum for elementary school students at Laguna and Acoma Pueblos, where I'm from, on the history of uranium mining through a grant from the Childhood Cancer Research Institute out of Boston University. So, you know, that connection sometimes students aren't aware of unless they pursue it themselves. So I'm very encouraged to hear the young people and their concern about this issue, because as our elder said, this population, this human resource that we have before us isn't going to be here forever. So it's up to your research, your knowledge, to continue this historical legacy. Tawae.
I just wanted to make one quick comment regarding the apathy or the lack of response about this issue, especially among younger people. And I think what we really need to do is link this issue with social justice issues and environmental justice issues. These are all related and interlinked and are the result, have the same causes, the same source. And I think if we make these connections between environmental poisoning, radiation poisoning, the war against the war and the war on the environment, if we make these connections, which are often not made, I think we'll get a lot more support behind us for this.
I just wanted to say that I felt when we would Skype with the people of Japan very much the way I feel today, that the U.S., me, bear a great responsibility and carry a great weight to heal the damage and trauma that we've inflicted, and to be part of the healing. And I see that as a part of a network that we extend to all of you, because I think that when we make personal connections and share our ideas and values around this issue, we will all be strengthened by it. And we do invite your participation in us. We have a brochure that we would be happy to give to you so that you can contact us directly. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to make a quick remark on millennials and students, since I am a recent graduate. So last night I was hanging out with a friend, and I was explaining to her where I just come from and about this conference. And, she was asking about it, and I said, it's sad that more young people aren't passionate about these issues. And she said, well, it's because the millennial generation is just a bunch of nihilists. So I can see where she's coming from, but at the same time, through conversations, I hear that my friends and students are very aware of all these issues, and they are passionate about these issues. It's just they don't know how to take this passion and turn it into action. So I don't think there's one formula to engaging students. I know a lot of the time, different people say, oh, social media, use social media, but it's not just social media. It's just having conversations with your friends and just keeping that conversation going. So I think, it's important just for us younger people to not give up and to continue that conversation with our friends. So that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your active participation in the workshop. I'd like to conclude the workshop by calling you to work together as a global citizen for supporting the nuclear victims for their justice and compensation. And let us translate what we learned here into power or energy to achieve a peaceful, nuclear weapon-free, just and sustainable world. Thank you very much for your participation and cooperation. And thank you very much, all the panelists. Yeah, give them a big hand. I have a practical information. Please take a lunch break from now. And afternoon workshop will start at 2 p.m. Thank you.